Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm honoured to be speaking with one of the most successful coaches on planet Earth, actually. I'm speaking with netball coach Lisa Alexander. Lisa, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you very much. I'm honoured to be on this show because I know that many coaches and interested sports people love listening to it.
Well, I'm certainly honoured to have you on and to tease some really interesting coaching and sports psych information out of you, if I may.
Of course.
I think to get started, if you could introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience, that would be awesome.
Well, my name is Lisa Alexander and I'm a qualified physical education and mathematics teacher. Got my degree quite a few years ago now. And basically have started my high performance coaching not long after I started teaching, so probably around 35 years now. And I was, up until just this year, the Australian Diamonds head coach. We decided to part ways in February, so that's a whole other story, but very proud of the achievements that we were able to make in the program, and I feel as a head coach that we've left the program in a great position to move forward. Having said that, it's been quite a time, and obviously for everyone around the world with this COVID-19, just amazing period of history to have to go through. So it's really interesting how people have reacted, and just observing everyone's behaviour in this time has been quite fascinating as well. But I've had quite a bit of work to do, even just in this little period, with some coaches, been mentoring and doing some leadership seminars and so forth. So I've kept myself out of trouble. I have been a high performance coach since 1995 when I first qualified for that with Netball Australia, and I worked my way up from basically coaching under 10s at Mount Eccles Netball Club, which is my daughter's netball club, all the way through to schoolgirls, state teams, and the Australian 21 and under team. So I've sort of worked my way up the ladder, and I'm one of the first head coaches to have not played in the actual team for the Australian Diamonds, which is seen to be quite a, glass ceiling breaking. And yeah, it's been a fantastic journey. I've loved every moment of it.
You mentioned being proud of your achievements, and I think that's probably an understatement. You're responsible for leading an organisation, a team that had an 81% win rate, and being involved with high performance sport myself, I know how unbelievable that is. And I'd like to, you mentioned a lot of detail related to earlier in your career as a teacher and a developing high performance coach, and we'll certainly, I'm sure, cover quite a bit of that. But I'd love to take you back to 2011, get in a time machine, go back to 2011 where you were just taking over the Australian Diamonds netball team. And I'm just going to borrow, Lisa, if I may, from a small passage from an article that I think was really rich in detail. So it says this: Alexander took the reins at a tumultuous time in 2011. Although the Diamonds had just won the Netball World Cup in extraordinary circumstances, behind the scenes the squad was unsettled. Netball Australia was looking for a leader who could bring the team together, one who would take a holistic approach by supporting the players as people as well as athletes. It was Alexander's experience as a teacher that most appealed to them, and combined with her coaching success at Melbourne Phoenix and Adelaide Thunderbirds, she was the perfect fit. So for me, that's being a sports psych, that's a passage rich with detail and things that we can talk about. But I know when you entered the organisation in 2011, you were looking for a holistic high performance program. So I'm interested, what specifically were the first couple of things that you did to start that process?
One of the first things that I did was actually take the time to interview all of the current squad members and find out much more about them as not only athletes but people. I wanted to get to the nub of what the issues were in the team, particularly around, at that time, there was a lot of stress in the lives of the players. They felt like they couldn't achieve their highest levels of performance because they had so much going on in their lives, having to balance their netball, their club, their country, but also many of them still had work that they had to do at that time. And now, thankfully, all the Diamonds are basically full-time professional athletes, although, of course, like everyone else, they've had to take a pay cut because of this issue we're going through, the pandemic.
Yep.
But primarily at that time, we still had some of the Diamonds, even in the Diamond squad, who were having to do study or to do a job to survive financially. So there was a lot going on, and I think we also needed a change in the direction of the high performance emphasis. We no longer could get away with just working on technical and tactical work. We had to start to embrace the reality of coming together as a team off the back of a very competitive and highly competitive domestic competition that would often have the athletes at each other's basically throats, competing against each other, and then having to come in to an Australian Diamonds program that put them all together quickly as teammates. So that crossing of that bridge was something that I was really interested in at the time, but also the athletes as people. Because of my teaching background, I thought it was extraordinarily important to acknowledge that these netballers were not just netballers, that, we couldn't just, put them in and chuck them out again if they weren't up to scratch. We had to actually work with our athletes and improve them not only as netballers but as people as well. The other area that I was charged with, which probably doesn't come into that article quite as much, was to really sell the Diamonds to the Australian public. That is to embrace the Diamonds' absolutely fantastic performances and record, but to really get the Diamonds to be close to the grassroots netballers and to have the Australian public really respect and be very proud of the Australian Diamonds. So we had to go out and sell our sport at the time as well. So there were extra things that were being asked of myself and also the athletes. So in order for us to do those extra things, we had to really get sorted out what it was that was most stressful at that time, the things that we could do to alleviate that stress, and the things that we could do to assist, I guess, our squad and our team to become stronger together. And that's why I started that, that's where I started on that journey.
I think what's really interesting to me, Lisa, is nowadays we're here in 2020, and some of the stuff you've spoken about there is becoming more of a custom in sports when a head coach comes into an organisation in the first place. But even just 9 years ago, or just under a decade ago, I would imagine some of the stuff you've spoken about there was quite foreign territory. So setting foot in the organisation, the first thing was to interview the squad, interview the individuals, would probably have been quite different. And you mentioned that the possible roots of that is from teaching, putting a person first philosophy forward rather than player first, rather than just the X's and O's. Because I think historically coaching has always embraced the notion of, here's my principles of play, here's my game model from these principles of play. Right, let's go. But you wanted to put a people first approach. Was that source from your teaching, or was it really just because of the state the team was in at that time, or a combination of both?
It's definitely a combination of both. Understanding as a teacher that you're teaching a person, not just a student. And I guess I always inherently understood that right from the start of my teaching, when I first started out in teaching. So, and I was also coaching at the same time. So my coaching would often inform my teaching. That is around setting expectations as a class and for individuals, so working on both the individual and the class together, and the practices that I built with that, and also, I guess, my ability to assist students to set goals and to be able to be motivated towards a desired result. That would come a lot from my coaching practice. And then my teaching practice would come into my coaching practice, where I was able to be, very organised, have a developmental plan, have a curriculum plan for, my coaching, but also from a team aspect, but also for the individual. So I guess listening, being able to key into an individual's strengths and the areas of improvement was part of what I did as a teacher, and also part of what I did as a coach, which is, I think, just in essence good teaching and coaching pedagogy at the end of the day. But it seems to be that we have our coaches really just being worried about running drills and running training sessions, when really they need to understand their people they've got in their team first and foremost, and then figure out what is going to be the priority levels to work on for that team for that season and so forth. So to me, it's not magic. I don't wave a magic wand. I get in there and work with the group that I have, even if it, as I said, it's the under 10 Mount Eccles team. I try not to have limits and boundaries on my teaching or my coaching. And that's very much what I wanted to do with the Diamonds. I wanted to come in and say, yep, great, you're world champions, but listen, I reckon we can be a hell of a lot better. I think we can be the world's best high performance program, bar none. We can be better than the All Blacks. So I wanted to lift the bar higher for the group, and I saw this holistic programming as a way to do that. I'd always felt, particularly in this performance psych area, that there was some missing elements, and that was very much a part of my interviews with the athletes, but also setting up individual case management for each athlete as well, which I trialled. It was, Australian Institute of Sport was going to bring it in anyway, and we ended up calling it another name, which escapes me at the moment, but at that time it was individual case management of athletes and individualised programming, so that each athlete, no matter what sport or whether it was individual or team sport, had to have their own individualised program, and it had to be holistic, and I wanted ours to be the best. So that's part of why we worked through that journey as well, was we wanted to be the world's best high performance program. The other area was, this area of team development, team, I guess, dynamics development, but also the culture of the team, plus the performance psych part for individuals, was pretty much ignored in high performance sport at that time, unless you were a Rick Charlesworth who was coaching the Hockeyroos or the Kookaburras, who completely, he did this in detail with all of his teams, and if you read his books, you'll see that he did that. So I thought it was just a necessary component of a high performance program, but I can tell you that many of the sports that I spoke to about it, they didn't think it was high performance. They thought it was soft, that I wasn't, demanding, and I wasn't, yelling at athletes, telling them to do things and putting, having that dog eat dog mentality. So I was button up against a lot of, I guess, my coaching colleagues at the time, who thought the track I was going was soft, whereas I thought it was actually necessary for high performance. Now, I can sort of say now, well, I told you so, because people are doing it a lot more now and understanding how important it is for performance. But I knew that it was at that time. I knew I wasn't going to get the best out of the athletes without looking at them as people and trying to apply holistic programming to their netball career, but also acknowledging they had an off-court career as well, because I thought as a teacher that was extremely important, that they had something else in their lives for their life balance, and to recognise their off-court families and time off netball was just as important, so they could then train and put their whole heart and soul into what I was asking them to do.
As always happens in these interviews and the Sports Site show, I can now take about 100 different directions. So that was so rich in detail. That was fantastic. And actually, I'm not going to go in the direction. I will be doing a U-turn in a minute. But you mentioned the attitude towards performance psychology a decade ago as compared to now. May I ask you, why do you think that coaches had that attitude then? That this is, I mean, I couldn't think of anything other than performance psych to stretch players. I mean, I think it's the ideal mode to stretch players as well as support players. It's that tension between the two. However, that's my opinion. And I'm completely biased, obviously. But why, Lisa, do you think that coaches had that opinion then? And what has created that shift over the past decade, do you think?
It's a really good question. I think it's sort of socio-cultural as well. I think it's that the coach was the knower of all things and the teller of all things. If I think back to my own career as a netballer and the coaches that I had, because one of the coaches I had was actually the coach who preceded me with the Diamonds. And so I knew, Norma's style and how she went about doing her coaching. And for the time, it was absolutely fantastic. And I'll never not say that, I didn't learn a hell of a lot off Norma. But I also learnt stuff about what not to do as well. So there were beliefs that I had about sport and people and netballers that I thought I could apply. So I was practicing performance psychology with my underage teams back when I started my coaching career, because I knew it was an area that I could get lots of great benefit out of. So I've always seen the two things together, that you've got the content, but you've also got the how you do it, or how you coach, or how you teach. So I guess it's been embedded in what I've done. And I think it became part of the success of the Diamonds. People stood up and took notice of our program, what we're doing and how we were doing it. We also brought a lot of, good technology along with us on that journey. So people were watching. And as one of my great mentors says, burgle as many ideas as you can. Burgle means, in Australian vernacular, go out and steal stuff. Well, people started to really, embrace the fact that the mind is, such an important part of performance, and you need to embed that's, performance psych practice into the individual's performances plus the team performance.
Fascinating. I'm going to do my U-turn now, and I do just want to dwell, if I may, briefly on this. At the start of your tenure, you sat down with these players, because I think to sit down with players and to help players open up is an enormous skill in and of itself, and I think it's so easy to bypass that. You mentioned listening. I love the fact you mentioned reflecting on individual strengths. When you sit down with a player, when you sat down with those players at that tumultuous time, you'd just taken over, And when you sit down with a player now, and your perception may have changed, the way you do it may have changed. What are you trying to do? Are you going in to say something, to propose something? Are you just sitting down and listening? Is it individual specific? It's a bit of a generic question, but when you sit down with a player, what's the process there for you?
Well, process usually is, the normal sort of conversations that you have with people on that level of, how's your family, your dog, your rabbits. I usually know a few little things. One of the things that I took pride in was that I actually knew what each of the athletes' families were like, and their also what they were studying, which was really important for me. Again, as a teacher, I'm a bit of a nerd with that stuff, and so I would always want to know what they were studying, or if they weren't studying, why they weren't studying, or what they were doing, because I was very, very much tried to empower them to say that, here I am, the head coach of the Australian netball team, and I think having work and a career outside of netball is really important as well. So even just giving that permission and that authority was really important, and I had to, model that as well by not being a completely obsessive workaholic coach, although my husband would probably say otherwise. But those were the things that I had to be authentic with that. So having those authentic conversations about the person, players will sniff when you're being fake.
Yeah.
So that was an important part of, building a relationship with each player. And that would be always a part of my conversations. And trying to, have questions that were very open and helping to solve the issues that the player had by them helping to problem solve that. So seeing me as a resource more and less of a teller, this is what you need to do. Although I did do that, of course, as well, giving feedback about where I thought they sat, and if that differed in their mind, trying to figure out why that was the case, but giving permission to have a discussion about their performances. They had not experienced that before. Most of the athletes that I dealt with in that national program had just been told stuff, and that was it. And it was, next. Whereas I tried to have, a two-way conversation where we were working on their netball improvement together. All our stuff, that was our view. We were a resource for them to improve, to get to where they wanted to be. I often had goalers coming into me and saying, I've got this percentage, I've got this, what do I need to do to get in there? And I would always say to them, don't aim for number 4, aim for number 1. Be the best goaler in the competition, then you cannot be ignored. Don't try and, go for the low-hanging fruit. Go for the best, and that way you'll ensure you get into the team. And sometimes just being really, the players would always tell me, and this would come through our wellbeing manager, who also had a very important role in all the feedback that I gave, was to ensure that they got, they didn't want fluff. They didn't want to be told they're great and, you're very close. They wanted to hear the truth of why they didn't get selected. That was always a big thing. Or, if they'd done something that had, their performance wasn't up to scratch or whatever it was, they wanted honesty always. And sometimes that's difficult. But if you've developed that great, relationship where there's trust, there's that element, they know that you've got their best interests at heart, then you can give people those difficult pieces of feedback and they can take it on board. They may not like it, but they respect you for it at the end of the day. And so that's what I tried to do with those conversations. I also tried to listen, and I took notes. and I would often reflect on things and come back to that. I would actually come back and have another conversation about it. That very first time, what I wanted to garner from them was what it was that they wanted. What were the three most important things they needed from me as their coach, head coach of the program, to enable them to win a gold medal in Glasgow. That was our very first benchmark event. Now, I deliberately picked an aspirational point in our program, and I wanted them to see that I was going to be with them for that journey. But what was it that was most critical at that time? And that's when I garnered a lot of information about the fact that they were stressed, they had too much on, they needed consistency of programming, all the sorts of things that came up at the time. The rich detail, as you were talking about before, came up in those conversations. So keeping it quite open, but having a great aspiration for them to be motivated. Well, this sounds great. I really want to be a part of this. This is what I need from you, Lisa.
We're going to test my listening skills here, and I'm going to reflect back what I heard in stages, because it was awesome. The first thing I heard was authenticity, a conversation. Dan, stop being such a sports psychologist. This is an authentic conversation. It doesn't need to be too structured. However, you then went on to say, in addition to just having an authentic conversation, just being yourself, it's going in there with some preparation of knowing that player. You know, and for you as a teacher, it was, what are you studying? What are you doing? Because you've got players that sort of age, and knowing a bit about their family. So that's important to you. Moving on to solving some of the challenges that they have, I heard you talk about asking open questions. And the importance of that process of open questions is you don't have the answer. And as you said, I love that language, Lisa, of I helped them to solve. Not I told them X and I told them Y and this is how you do this. Is I helped them to solve that. Then I heard you talk about aspiration and having big goals. This is our program. This is what we want to achieve. And I want you to be not aim for number 4, but aim for number 1. However, I think what you did there with your language was really, really interesting, because you're kind of saying, let's be excited about what we're trying to achieve here. But then you also talked about honesty. I'm going to be honest with you. So this is what we're trying to achieve. This is really cool. This is really exciting. Wow, let's get hyped for this. Now, this is where you are. So honesty, and on the Sports Psych Show, when we talked about leadership in the past, honesty is just about the number 1 characteristic that's important for a leader. And then I love what you said about almost moving on. The next stage is, what do you need from me? What do you need from me? What can I help you with to help you get to number 1 and win the World Cup with us? And then just the final few things, you emphasize listening skills. I would go in and make sure my listening skills were top notch. I would take notes. So I'm being a conscientious coach. I'm taking notes, and then I'll find the opportunity to return back to that conversation at some point. Does that kind of neatly summarize that process?
Very much so. Thank you. Could you write my book for me?
I just think that's awesome. And so another thing I want to tease out of you is, and this is such an underestimated thing, especially in international team sports, when I've been involved with them, this has come up time and again, is that notion of competition versus cooperation. And you mentioned earlier about the coming together as a team. You mentioned that players competing against each other on a club level, but you want them to come together. It sounds like that was part of the tumultuous thing that you were dealing with. How, if I may ask, and if you can remember, were there certain things you did that enabled you to do that, or was it just that process of listening to players?
No, we definitely took I guess, a deliberate strategy to improve our team dynamics. This is where I had my great facilitator, Ray McLean, come in to help me with that area from leading teams. And we call ourselves, but we're not psychologists, as you know, Dan, myself and Ray. We are the practical ones. We're the mechanics.
Sure.
And what Ray has a great gift for is his ability to cut through the bull that goes on in teams and get straight to the nub of it. He's an excellent facilitator. And so what he could do in those short periods of time with us as together as a squad, we could get a lot of work done very efficiently around team dynamics work. Of course, at the start, it took more time because we had to establish our Sisters in Arms trademark. That had to come out very authentically again and very organically out of these sessions. So Ray ran a few of these different sessions. He ran them with the players and the staff together. He ran them separately, players and staff separately. I, as a head coach, had to give away power in this relationship, which is really important. That this is risky stuff. You're giving over more power to your athlete group. But again, as I guess from my teaching and past coaching background, the other area I forgot to mention earlier was being a captain coach. So I played and coached the team that I was in, and we had a lot of success in that team. But I knew that it was the players from that experience. It's the ones on the court doing the stuff that really counts. So if you can get the smarter, more leaderful players in amongst your team, 9 times out of 10 you're going to win, because you've got those athletes that are smart. They know the right decisions to make at the right times, and they lead the group, especially well. So that's what makes me look good as a coach with my coaching record. I must have just chosen all the right players. But any case, getting back to our team, we worked on it specifically, and we knew that we needed to do some work because we knew within that team there'd been a huge pecking order, there'd been cliques, and it had to be broken down. There'd been real stress around team selection and things like that. So not only did we get much more of a squad mentality to the Diamonds, so it was much more about the Diamond squad, and having the players understand that we're only as strong as our weakest link in the squad, that there would be times when you have injury and somebody will have to come up into it. So the more we put that work together into the strength of the squad, the more that we would be the high-performing team and squad that we wanted to be. And part of Ray's remit was to develop that team culture together and the activities that we did. But then myself as a coach, I had to embed all of that within our program. So I couldn't just say, we'll do these team development sessions and then, I'll take over everything else outside of that. So I won't talk to the leaders about the programming. No, you can't do it. So you have to do it in a very cooperative, collaborative, consultative way. Otherwise, it will not work. And the players will realise it's just, words, Sisters in Arms, but the coach really doesn't believe in it. So that whole program, including all the staff, that was our staff, our performance analyst, our physio, our doctor, everyone. And as Ray always says, the doctors are the hardest ones to get on board with this. And he also took time with our physio at the time, Steve Hawkins, who's a very dear friend of mine and great supporter. But he knew that he had to convince Steve to embrace this. And once he got through Steve's sort of very hypercritical nature, once he got Steve on board with, this is actually going to be a great thing for you as a physio. It means players should be becoming more self-managed and self-reliant in this whole area of injury management. It all feeds into how we're going to be a high-performing team, because we're responsible for our actions at all times. And so that was that connection between high performance, but also behaving as a high performance team, which is what Ray worked on with us. Hopefully that kind of answers your first question that you asked a while ago, Dan.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here as well. Only you can see me, and you can see me nodding vigorously because for me, what you've just described, Lisa, is the difference that makes a difference in terms of holistic high performance cultures. Because I think that the words that come to my mind are integration versus isolation, because so often, we're obviously talking about the adult elite level here, where there are more resources and there are more key players or key stakeholders, key coaches, and you talked about a leadership coach in Ray, and so often I think in these cultures they'll tick a box. They say, hey, we've got our leadership coach, or we've got our sports psychologist, and they'll come in and they'll do a fancy presentation. It's all wonderful and fantastic, and everybody comes out of the room smiling, and it's great, and then it's forgotten about. And that integration for me is the thing that makes a difference, and that's an everyday thing, isn't it? That's so challenging to do for yourself as a head coach and for the rest of your staff. I just want to, if I may, Sisters in Arms, you had some help to develop that. It was a process of giving away power, but if you can you tell us a couple of practices around Sisters in Arms? What did that look like at the ground level, at the coalface?
What it looked like was that you would see the leaders leading. You would see them, rather than me having to, say, let's start, let's lift our standard, let's do this, let's do that. You would see the leaders do that. I wouldn't. There was one tour I was on where there was an issue with one of the senior players. I didn't even need to enter into any conversations at all with that player because our leadership group dealt with it. To me, that was Sisters in Arms working, because it was all about taking responsibility for our actions and understanding our role as leaders to lead in the way that we want to lead. We want to be seen as and at the time it was an intimidating, true team. That means authentic team. And we want to be intimidating. Well, we can't be intimidating if somebody's not, training their hardest, or, whinging and whining about something. So they're the sorts of little details that the leadership team would take care of, those standards that we would have. Things like wearing the right, and I know it sounds simple, but wearing the right uniform at breakfast. If a player went to the doctor and told her, look, quietly, Sophie, you can't wear your skins at breakfast. Okay, we agreed that we need to be dressed in our tracksuits or whatever it was. But that was an example of Sisters in Arms, that we were fair dinkum, which I love the word fair dinkum. It's Aussie vernacular for real. That they were fair dinkum about Sisters in Arms. They believed in it. They believed if we kept our standards high, that if we reviewed every training session to see what worked, what we need to work on for the next training session, they had great ownership then of that whole preparation phase leading into a test match. So they were completely engaged in the trainings, the programs, the behaviours around it, why we needed to do the things we needed to do at certain times, ice baths, recovery, psych sessions, feedback, whatever it was, performance analysis, all of that, all of those key facets fitted into our Sisters in Arms beautiful system. And they knew how important their role was in that they would keep that system lubricated continuously, and that's what would get our great performances at the right time. They knew that if we did the preparation as well as we could, we would get the success from that. And, obviously being as successful as we were, there were many times that we had to have difficult conversations with different athletes at different times. It was never smooth sailing, but we had a structure and we had a framework to always come back to. It was like our compass. It helped us to reset ourselves when we needed to ask ourselves if there was a conundrum and a problem, what's our sisters in arms response to this? And the answer would just present itself because everyone knew what that would be, that we had to put the team ahead of our own needs at different times. And at other times, we had to put our own needs ahead of the team because we knew that if we did that, we would be in a better place for the team later on down the track. And I always love the quote that I use about high performance. Doing the right thing when no one's watching is what high performance is all about. And that was so true for the Australian Diamonds.
Absolutely fascinating. There's loads of questions I could ask you about some of that, but mindful of your time and last couple of questions, I do want to move to on the court. And you mentioned, and with relation to what you've spoken about there, the giving away the power, the leaders leading, the leaders driving the culture, driving the behaviors. I've always said that, coaches who sort of talk about being made redundant, it's a fanciful term. It's never going to happen completely, and you don't want that to happen. But obviously, moving more towards a player-driven, player-led culture. I just want to explore for the last couple of minutes how that works for you as a coach on court. You talked about developing smarter players because ultimately they're the most important people because they're in the thick of the action out there. That tension between being a directive coach, because you will have your game model and you will have your instructional points, but also if you want to develop smarter players, you want players to be able to make decisions on the run. So was there a tension there in terms of directive versus non-directive coaching for you? How did you develop smarter players?
There was always a tension. And, often it was due to the personnel that we had on the court at a particular time, or if we didn't have as much, if we didn't have our experienced defence end, which, you could argue the last probably couple of years we didn't have as experienced defence end as we might have otherwise planned for. So that was where the tension between empowering but then having enough coaching feedback to get the result we wanted was just a continuous process and a continuous push and pull. And I also had a wonderful time having two younger coaches working with me the last 2 years, Megan Anderson and Claire Ferguson, both ex-Australian players as well. But they also brought a more modern, understanding of not telling players what to do, but getting them to problem solve for themselves. And probably what I had to do with those two is I had to actually coach them as well to not overcoach and tell the players and give the players all the answers, but actually make sure I was role modelling that, more problem-solving approach to our training sessions. So having activities where the players could talk, get feedback, but still work hard, but have enough time to actually figure stuff out while we were playing it. So we spent a lot of time in those last couple of years of designing training sessions that were really testing out our players, putting them under more pressure than they would be in a normal test match and asking them to figure out and problem solve as they were going. So we spent, many, many hours planning those training sessions to try to get more of that out of the athletes. Not always successful, mind you. Sometimes it's just, players have to learn it in the cauldron of on the competitive test match. Sometimes you cannot replicate that, and they will learn a lesson in that. They'll learn it. Sometimes it's a hard lesson. I might have to take them off. And then the other thing in international sport, which people may not know for netball, we don't get what we call timeouts. In domestic level netball, they do, but in international level, they don't. So that was always a really big thing that we had to prepare the athletes for each time. They would be so conditioned to having a timeout during a quarter from their coaches that they hadn't learned how to control the momentum in the 15 minutes of a quarter, and we had to actually reprogram them for that in each international series. And that actually in itself was a pretty difficult job to do. And people underestimated how much that actually affected, results and people's performances as well.
Fascinating stuff. My final question. Lisa Alexander, a decade ago, prior to coaching the Australian Diamonds, Lisa Alexander now, from a coaching standpoint, I'm sure you could pinpoint lots of things, but what one overarching thing has changed, improved, or developed?
Oh, look, I think that's such a good question, because I'm such a continuous learner that I have a real belief in the fact that I need competitive and performance tension myself to be at my best. So I apply a lot of the performance psychology principles to my own coaching. So I guess what I'm saying there, and I don't know whether I'm trying to be, I don't ever think I'm perfect, is one of the things, like I don't think, oh, well, I've coached for 8 years and we've won a world title, a Commonwealth Games gold medal. I've got an 81% win-loss record, but that's a record of the whole program, and I've led it, and I've led it well. But it doesn't mean that I think I'm brilliant at some things now that I don't think I was 10 years ago. I think what I'm better at now is sitting back and letting others lead and not being so conscious of having to control everything in a training session, and being more reflective and learning more from observing what's going on. So being back a bit from the whole group and watching the whole group work, and then stepping in when it's the right time. That's probably what I'm much better at now. And also I think I can pretty much now have confidence to coach most sports, because you get to a point as a head coach in a sport, particularly your sport, but you realise how much crosses over into other sports and how much I could offer now to other sports. I believe I've got a lot to offer from a different perspective for those sports. So you never know. Could be coaching English rugby one day.
Amazing. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Lisa, thank you so much for your time. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'll be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.